He came to the United States with a scholarship and a dream to change his family's destiny, but a system error, an ignored warning, and a law that suddenly changed made him invisible. Without a visa, without a home, and without a way out, Esteban was sleeping in subway stations and cleaning floors in secret until a social worker changed everything. What happened next? No one could have predicted. The plane landed at George Bush Intercontinental Airport in Houston on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of August. The heat was suffocating, the sky looked like lead, and the air smelled of fuel and humidity. Esteban descended from the plane with sweaty hands and a trembling smile. He was 22 years old, coming from a small village in the Guatemalan highlands, and in his pockets he carried only $300, carefully folded inside a plastic envelope, along with a letter written by his mother that he still didn't dare to open. If you like interesting stories, hit like, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss any of our content, and tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. We'd love to hear from you. His student visa was stamped in his passport with blue ink. He came to study engineering at a Houston community college, thanks to a partial scholarship that only covered tuition. Everything else, food, transportation, books, housing, was his responsibility. But he didn't think about that. In his mind, only the phrase his grandmother had repeated since he was a child echoed, "In the North, dreams come true, if you endure the cold of the soul." The news that he had been accepted to an American university spread like wildfire in his community. At church, they took up a collection. A neighbor who lived in the capital donated his suitcase. An older woman gave him a used Spanish-English dictionary. For weeks, everyone gave him something: coins, advice, prayers. The hope for a different future wasn't just his. He carried it for everyone. When he went through immigration and the officer asked him routine questions, Esteban responded with a nervous but clear accent. He showed all his documents. Everything was in order. It was only when he stepped out onto the street, with the sun hitting his face and the noise of unfamiliar cars around him, that he truly understood what he had done. He had left everything behind. He had bet his entire life on a promise. On the university campus, they assigned him a small room, shared with another international student, a young Nigerian named Tunde, who spoke fast and laughed loudly. For the first few days, Esteban barely left the dorm. He felt like a bug in a fishbowl, observed, judged, invisible. He struggled to understand classes and even more to participate. But every night before sleeping, he looked at the photo of his mother and sister taped to the wall with adhesive tape and repeated to himself, "Hold on. You just have to hold on." He ate rice with canned beans. He moved on foot under the sun or rain, always afraid of getting lost. He didn't know anyone. He didn't trust anyone. He only trusted that little paper where he wrote down what he needed to study, what he needed to spend, and what he should send home someday when he could. At university, he quickly noticed that many classmates had cars, laptops, new cell phones. He wrote his assignments in an old notebook and used the lab computers. While others complained about having to wake up early, Esteban dreamed of having free time to sleep more than 5 hours. It didn't matter. He knew he was there for something bigger than tiredness. English wasn't his language, but he studied it every night until he fell asleep with books open on his chest. He repeated phrases, wrote down new words, recorded his own voice reading aloud. Every time he called his mother from a public phone, he told her everything was going well, that he was learning a lot, that the university was beautiful. He lied with a firm voice so as not to worry her. One day after leaving class, Esteban sat on a campus bench and looked at the sky. He had nowhere to go, he had no friends, but he had something money can't buy: unbreakable will. He knew he couldn't fail, not just for himself. Not just for his mother, who washed other people's clothes to survive. Not just for his younger sister, who still dreamed of studying medicine. Esteban felt he carried the hopes of an entire community. This is how the first month went by. Then the second. Each day was a silent battle. Against the language, against loneliness, against fear. But Esteban didn't give up. He walked with his head held high, even though his feet bled inside his worn shoes. He said thank you with a smile, even when they didn't understand him. What he still didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that fate was about to test him like never before. That his struggle was just beginning. That papers, permits, the law, all of that would become a cruel maze from which he wouldn't emerge unscathed. But that afternoon, as the wind moved his hair and a group of students laughed in the distance, Esteban still believed in dreams. And that, at least for now, was enough. Esteban woke up every day before dawn, sometimes having slept no more than 3 hours. The alarm was nothing more than a borrowed cell phone's alert, but for him, it sounded like a shot to the heart. He had classes from 7 in the morning, and before that he had to review his notes, go over formulas, and walk more than 30 minutes to campus because he could no longer afford the bus pass. At first, he tried to survive on what little remained of the initial $300. He bought rice, eggs, and canned beans at a discount store far away, but that sold cheaply. He ate once a day, almost always the same thing. He told himself it was temporary, that his body could resist, that the mind had to be stronger than the stomach. But the real problem came when he understood the limits of his scholarship. It only covered tuition. No books, no materials, no health insurance, nothing else. When he asked if he could work to cover his expenses, they told him that with his F1 visa, he was only authorized to work on campus and with special permission. He tried. He asked at the library, at the student cafeteria, at the maintenance office. Everyone told him the same thing. There's a waiting list. We're sorry. So he spent weeks without any formal opportunities. Desperate, he accepted washing dishes at night in a small Mexican restaurant in the Eastwood neighborhood. They paid him in cash, no questions asked. $10 an hour, $12 if he stayed until closing. There he met others like him. Hondurans, Salvadorans, some Mexicans, all with similar stories, all afraid of being discovered. They worked fast in silence with their eyes down. No one asked where you came from or what you did during the day. The motto was clear: if you don't make noise, you can come back tomorrow. After closing the restaurant, Esteban walked to his dorm. Sometimes he arrived after 1 in the morning. He showered in silence so as not to wake Tunde, and then studied until his eyes couldn't take any more. He slept dressed, with the notebook still in his hand, because he knew time wasn't enough. He also worked weekends. In the downtown parking lot, under the sun or rain, he helped move cars, clean windows, pick up trash. With the money he earned, he bought used books, printed his assignments at the public library, and sent $5, $10 to his mom when he could. He never complained, ever. He told himself that each night washing dishes was one more step toward the diploma. Every penny was a brick on the path to something better. He knew he was breaking the rules, that if they discovered him, he could lose everything, but he saw no other way out. It was that or give up. And giving up for him was not an option. One afternoon, while washing the restaurant kitchen floor, he heard the cooks laughing about something in English. He didn't understand anything, but he laughed too, reflexively. One of them looked at him and said, "You don't understand, right?" Esteban shook his head. The man shrugged and kept working. At that moment, Esteban felt a stabbing in his chest. Not because of the mockery, but because he realized he was completely isolated. He lived between two worlds where he didn't quite belong to either. At university, he was the quiet kid, always tired, with sunken eyes and always the same clothes. No one knew he worked at night. No one knew he sometimes studied hungry. Some professors looked at him with certain pity, others with indifference. Only an algebra teacher, Mrs. Phelps, congratulated him one day for his effort. "You're one of the few who doesn't give up," she told him. He wrote that phrase on a piece of paper and taped it to his wall. From time to time, he received messages from his mother in Guatemala. "Are you okay, son? Take care of yourself, don't work too hard, don't get sick." Sometimes Esteban didn't respond immediately. It hurt to lie. He didn't want to worry her. He didn't want her to know that sometimes he went days without eating well, that his hair was falling out from stress, that his vision was deteriorating from exhaustion. One night, while walking back to the dorm in cold rain, he stopped in front of a puddle and looked at himself. He was soaked, with worn shoes, hands cracked from kitchen soap, and red eyes from chlorine. He wondered if all this was worth it, but the next second he clenched his teeth and kept walking. Because for him there was no alternative. He knew he was playing with fire, that the immigration system was cold and cruel, that one mistake could cost him everything. But he also knew he was building something with each sacrifice, and that although no one else could see it, he was moving forward. What he didn't imagine was that his world was about to be completely shaken by a single warning. A sentence coldly spoken by a government agent in the least expected place would change his destiny forever. It was Friday night, and the restaurant was full. The noise of dishes, loud orders, and background music mixed with the smell of grease, garlic, and freshly made tortillas. Esteban was quickly cleaning tables, trying to go unnoticed. He had been working there for almost 6 months, 3 times a week, always at night, always in silence. That night, however, something was different. Since he arrived, he noticed a strange atmosphere. One of the cooks, a Guatemalan who called himself El Flaco, whispered in his ear, "Don't talk much today. They say ICE came by another restaurant." Esteban nodded without asking. He had heard stories. People who disappeared, friends who one day didn't come back, rumors that crossed kitchens like flying knives. But he never thought it would be that night, that it would be him. At 10:45, while taking out the trash through the back door, he heard a loud bang. A door suddenly opened and a shout, "Everyone against the wall! Hands up!" 2 agents with black jackets and yellow letters entered with firm steps. One of them pointed a flashlight at each face. No one said anything. No one moved. Esteban felt his soul drop to his stomach. His breathing became short. Cold sweat ran down his back. In his mind, only one word fit: mother. He thought of her, of his sister, of the path he had traveled, and that maybe this was the end. One of the agents approached him directly, not by chance, not by accident. He was the youngest of the group, tall, white, grey eyes. He looked at him with disdain. "Your name?" he asked in English. Esteban took a second to understand. He stammered, responded, Esteban Gutierrez." The agent didn't need more. He asked for identification. Esteban handed over his student ID. The agent looked at it with a raised eyebrow. "Student? And why are you working here?" The question hit him like a stone. He tried to explain in rushed English that he had no other choice, that he needed to survive, that he only washed dishes. The agent interrupted him. "You know this is illegal, right? Even though you have a student visa, you can't work off campus." Then he paused, looked him up and down, and added coldly, "One more time, and you're out. Understand? Just one more." Esteban nodded, not knowing whether to speak or stay quiet. The agent took notes in a notebook, returned the ID carelessly, and walked away. They didn't handcuff him. They didn't take him out. But the threat hung in the air like an invisible sword over his head. The entire restaurant fell silent for eternal seconds. Then, little by little, routine returned. But for Esteban, nothing was the same. His body was still there, washing dishes, drying glasses, cleaning floors. But his mind was elsewhere, in uncertainty, in fear, in the brutal reality that had just slapped him in the face. When he finished his shift that night, he didn't walk straight to his dorm. He sat on a bench in front of a closed store and looked at the sky. There were no stars, only dark clouds. He thought about the warning, about that "one more and you're out," and for the first time since his arrival, he felt he might have reached his limit. The next day, he didn't go to work. He stayed in his room, in silence, without telling Tunda anything. He didn't eat, he didn't study. He just stayed there, with his back against the wall, breathing slowly, as if he didn't want to make noise even in his own body. The only thing he did was reread his F1 visa regulations over and over, as if that could change something. He discovered the agent was right. He was violating the terms of his immigration status. And not only that, if he did it again, he could be deported without the right to a hearing. That fact left him frozen. There was no margin for error, no safety net. It was like walking on a tightrope over a bottomless abyss. During the following days, he quit the restaurant job. He also quit the parking lot job. He survived eating what he found in campus food pantries, and when there was nothing, he simply didn't eat. He lost weight. The bones in his face became visible. The dark circles were deep, his clothes looser. El Flaco sent him several messages asking if he was okay. Esteban didn't respond. He didn't want to involve anyone. He didn't want anyone to know the panic that invaded him, the paranoia of looking over his shoulder every time he walked, the fear that a simple conversation would expose him. He tried to seek help at the International Students' Office, but everything was bureaucracy. Forms, long appointments, cold answers. They told him they couldn't do anything if he had violated his visa conditions, that he should stay in compliance, period. It was then that he began living with the constant fear of being discovered. He didn't sleep well. He dreamed that they knocked on the dorm door and took him away, that his mother was waiting for him at the airport with tears in her eyes, and he couldn't look her in the eyes. From then on, each day was a countdown without numbers. He lived on pause, on alert. He no longer studied with the same enthusiasm. He no longer believed with the same strength. He wondered if all this was really worth it. And without knowing it, that question would find its answer very soon. Because while he struggled to move forward, something much worse was approaching, something that not even a warning could have prevented. It was the year 2020. The world was stopping, but Esteban barely had time to notice what was happening outside his small bubble of anguish. The pandemic was beginning to take force. Classes were moving to digital platforms. Offices were closing and borders were hardening. But in the midst of global chaos, Esteban faced his own personal storm. His F1 visa was about to expire. He found out by checking his passport one random night. The expiration date stood out like a threat. He still had classes to take. There was still a path to travel, but he had to renew it. He already knew that. What he didn't know was that the rules had changed. That due to a recent executive order, those who didn't renew their status before expiration could no longer legally remain in the country while waiting for approval. That information, which had previously been covered by a grace period, had been modified in a silent update by the Immigration Service. And like thousands of international students, Esteban didn't find out. No one called him, no one sent him an email, no professor alerted him, and since he hadn't had an assigned counselor since the offices closed, he simply let it pass. He filled out the renewal forms weeks late. He thought everything was fine. That, like other years, it was enough to submit the papers, pay the fee, and wait. But that year wasn't like the others. That year, just one day late was enough for everything to fall apart. When the official notification arrived by mail, Esteban took time to understand what it said. The technical English, legal terms, incomprehensible acronyms, everything sounded distant. Only one phrase was burned into his mind, freezing his blood. Your immigration status has been considered inactive, and therefore you are in an irregular situation in United States territory. It was like receiving a sentence without trial, a conviction without defense. He sat on the dorm stairs with the letter trembling in his hands. He read it over and over, unable to believe it. He had lost everything, from one day to the next, without anyone warning him, without even having committed a real crime, just for not understanding a new rule in time. He tried calling the contact number on the letter. No one answered. Then he wrote an email to the International Students Office. They responded with an automated message. Due to high demand, your inquiry will be attended to within 5 to 10 business days. It was never attended to. When he went to the campus office, they informed him that having lost his immigration status, he could no longer continue occupying the student dorm. They gave him 72 hours to vacate. It didn't matter that he paid on time. It didn't matter that he was an active student with good grades. Without a visa, he was a ghost. There was no ceremony, no explanations, just a cardboard box where he put his few belongings: clothes, books, the old dictionary, the photo of his mother and sister, the university uniform carefully folded. He left the building in silence, with a backpack on his shoulder and uncertainty choking him. During the first few days, he slept at a Tunde acquaintance's house, an African student who offered him his couch for a couple of nights. Then the guy had to move, and the favor ended. Esteban was left on the street, literally, without address, without papers, without rights to anything. At first, he tried to maintain his routine. He went to the public library to study, connect to online classes when he could, search for information on how to fix his situation. But the days became increasingly difficult. He didn't have a fixed place to stay. He slept in subway stations, in public bathrooms, in parks closed due to the pandemic. He bathed in community center sinks. He washed his clothes in gas station bathrooms when he could. He ate from donations, from leftovers, from the charity of strangers who didn't know who he was, but gave him a bag of food without asking. And still, he kept lying. When he talked to his mother via video call, he connected from the library and sat in front of a white wall. He said he was fine, that everything was in order, that he would return to in-person classes soon. He didn't want to break her heart. He didn't want her to know that her son, the first to reach a university abroad, slept on cardboard. One day, while walking downtown Houston, a former classmate recognized him. He asked how he was, if he was still studying, if he had any work. Esteban made up a quick story. "I'm in an internship in Dallas," he said. The guy smiled and wished him luck. Esteban smiled back. When the other left, he leaned against a building wall and shed a tear, not because of the lie, but because he didn't know if he would ever tell the truth again. He became invisible. He wasn't in any registry. He couldn't enroll in new courses. He couldn't work. He couldn't leave the country without being banned for years. And he couldn't stay without risking immediate deportation. He was trapped in no man's land. But even in that abyss, a spark remained alive. Because the darker the tunnel, the stronger he clung to the memory of why he had come. To his mother's voice telling him, "Hold on, son, good things are slow to come, but they arrive." And just when it seemed like there was no one left, someone saw him. The first night Esteban slept in a subway station was the worst. Not because of the cold, which chilled his bones even in a mild Houston autumn, nor because of the smell of old disinfectant, nor because of the metallic sounds of trains that echoed like mechanical nightmares. The worst was the look from a girl, about 7 or 8 years old, who saw him while he settled on a concrete bench. She looked at him with those eyes that don't understand bureaucracy, or borders, or laws. She looked at him like someone who sees another who has fallen. And then she left, holding her mother's hand without saying a single word. That night, Esteban covered himself with his backpack. He used his sweatshirt as a pillow and the sleeves to hide his face. He didn't want to cry. He didn't want to be seen. But the tears came anyway, silent, hard, bitter. During the first weeks as homeless undocumented, Esteban learned more about the city than in all the previous months. He discovered which public bathrooms were cleaned most often, which parks closed later, which subway stations were less monitored at night. He learned to fold clothes so they wouldn't wrinkle too much when sleeping on them. He learned to walk without attracting attention, to pretend he was going somewhere when in reality he was going nowhere. He also perfected the art of lying. He told his former classmates he was in an intensive online course, that he had gotten a professional internship in another state, that he was very busy. That's why he didn't respond to messages. Everyone congratulated him. Everyone told him how proud Esteban, and he thanked them with emojis and short phrases while drinking tap water from a park. Inside, he felt torn, because the more the lie grew, the smaller he felt. He ate what he could. Sometimes he collected fruits or sandwiches discarded by supermarkets that threw them away at the end of the day. Other times, he ate at community centers that distributed hot food to those who needed a hand. He never said he was a student. He never said he was an immigrant. He just said, "I'm hungry." And that was enough. The hardest part was bathing. Hygiene, that basic luxury most take for granted, became an obsession. Every time he managed to shower in a public bathroom or in campus sinks secretly, he felt he regained a bit of dignity. But it didn't last long. Within hours, he would sweat again, get dirty again, smell himself as if his body reminded him he was no longer part of the normal world. To keep from going crazy, Esteban imposed a routine on himself. He went to the public library every day. Even though he had no official classes, he kept studying. He read electronics books, solved math exercises in recycled notebooks, practiced English with free audio files. He told himself that somehow all of this would be useful, that he couldn't let his mind rust just because his body suffered. One afternoon, while reading at one of the library tables, he fell asleep with his head on the book. The security guard woke him with a tap on the shoulder. "You can't sleep here, sir," he said in a kind but firm tone. Esteban nodded and left, with red eyes and numb muscles. He walked aimlessly for hours, until night found him again at a subway station, looking at the dirty ceiling, wondering how everything could have changed so much, so quickly. What tormented him most wasn't hunger or cold, or the constant fear of being arrested. It was the feeling of having become a ghost. No one was looking for him. No one asked about him. No one really knew where he was. It was as if he had been erased from the world. And maybe, he sometimes thought, that was exactly what the system wanted. One night, while waiting for the station to close so he could lie down without getting kicked out, he sat on the floor next to an older man who smelled of alcohol and dirt. The guy looked at him sideways and asked, "First time?" Esteban didn't respond. The man smiled toothlessly and said, "It happens to everyone. The street doesn't forgive, but it doesn't forget either." Esteban didn't know if that was a threat or advice. He just kept staring ahead, feeling he no longer had the strength to even respond. But then, something happened. Something small, but different. On a Monday morning, while standing in line to receive bread and coffee at a community center in the Gulfton neighborhood, he almost fainted. He hadn't eaten for 2 days. His vision blurred and the bread he was holding fell from his hands. He held onto a wall, trembling, trying to stay upright. That's where Marta appeared. A middle-aged woman, cinnamon skin, hair tied back, lively eyes. She wore a badge with the center's logo. She approached quickly and said, "Hey, son, are you okay?" Esteban tried to say yes, but no words came out. Marta took his arm firmly. She sat him down, gave him water, spoke to him slowly, the way you speak to someone who's about to break. And he broke. He cried. In front of her, in front of everyone, like he had never cried before. And for the first time in a long time, someone listened to him. If you're enjoying this story, hit like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay up to date with all our content. Marta didn't let go. While Esteban cried with his eyes closed and his body shrunk from shame, She handed him a napkin, gave him an energy bar from the bottom of her purse, and without asking any more, accompanied him to a small room inside the community center. No one followed them. No one interrupted. She let him sit in a broken chair and placed a cup of hot tea in front of him. Then she sat across from him, folded her hands on the table, and looked at him with a disarming calm. "Your name is Esteban, right?" she asked in a soft voice without judgment. He nodded, wiping his face with the sleeve of his stained sweatshirt. "How long has it been since you slept in a bed?" Esteban swallowed hard. He didn't want to answer, but he also didn't want to keep pretending. Something in Marta's voice gave him permission to stop lying, and for the first time in a long time, he began to speak. He told everything. From the flight that brought him from Guatemala with his student visa to the night he was warned by ICE, including the bureaucratic error that left him without immigration status and homeless. Each word came out with difficulty, but Marta didn't interrupt him. She just listened, nodded, took mental notes. Sometimes she sighed with sorrow. Other times, she simply closed her eyes for a second, as if she needed to contain her anger. "Do you have any family here?" she asked at the end. "No, just my mom and my little sister, back in Guatemala." Marta took a deep breath. "Look, Esteban, what you're going through isn't your fault. The system is made for people like you to get lost along the way. But here, nobody gets lost. Here, when someone falls, others lift them up." She took a wrinkled brochure from her purse and placed it on the table. It was from a temporary shelter for young migrants without status. It wasn't a hotel, it wasn't comfortable, but it had beds, food, and above all, protection. "I work with a support network. It's not perfect, but we know the system's cracks, and we know how to walk without it swallowing you up." She looked him straight in the eyes. "We can get you in as a volunteer. Unpaid, of course, but at least you'll have a roof. And with time, maybe we can find a legal way out." Esteban didn't know what to say. He wanted to thank her, but the words wouldn't come out. Marta understood anyway. "Eat something. Then I'll take you," she said, getting up. "Today the street ends, even if it's just for one night." That night, Esteban slept on a bunk bed in a room shared with 3 other young men. One of them was from El Salvador, another from Honduras. The third was Mexican, deported once, but who had managed to return. All had similar stories. All slept with one eye open, but that night, Esteban slept without fear. For the first time in weeks, he didn't fear that someone would kick him out at dawn. The following days were confusing but hopeful. Marta introduced him to a volunteer lawyer from a non-profit organization that offered free legal orientation for immigrants at risk. The lawyer's name was Gabriela. She was the daughter of immigrants, born in San Diego, with a strong character and an immense heart. "Your case is complicated, Esteban," she told him firmly. "You don't qualify for DACA because you arrived as an adult. You don't have asylum or refugee status because you didn't escape direct persecution. But there's something we can try, a special process for exceptional circumstances of social vulnerability." Esteban blinked. He had never heard those words. "It's not easy," Gabriela continued. "Very few get approved. But you have something important. Clean academic record, community involvement, and now you're in a social support network. It's a foundation, thin, yes, but enough to submit an application." Esteban couldn't believe it. It was the first time in months that someone said there was a possibility, however minimal. How long does the process take? Months, sometimes more than a year. And during that time you can't work, leave the country, or get into trouble. Esteban let out a bitter laugh. "More trouble than this?" Gabriela smiled. Marta, who was accompanying him in the meeting, put her hand on his shoulder. "You resisted all this alone, Esteban. Now you're not alone anymore. We're going to fight with you." With the shelter's help, Esteban began collaborating as a volunteer in basic tasks, distributing food, organizing donated clothes, translating documents for other migrants who couldn't read. He became a kind of older brother to newcomers. His calm attitude, his way of listening, his story inspired others. Some called him the engineer, although he didn't dare claim that title yet. Marta watched him with pride. "You're not here out of charity," she told him. "You're here because you deserve it. And one day, you're going to wear that university uniform again. I know it." Esteban kept that uniform with more care than ever. He folded it every week. He dusted it off. He kept it clean, even though he didn't wear it. For him, it was more than a garment. It was a reminder of who he was and who he wanted to be again. The nights were still cold. Doubts remained. But now Esteban had something he hadn't had in a long time: hope. And while the legal case advanced slowly, each step was a small victory. A signature, a medical appointment, a background check. Everything counted, everything added up. But what nobody imagined, not even Marta, not Gabriela, was that the process they started together would end in a hearing room with the power to change everything, for better or to destroy what little he had managed to build. The office where Gabriela worked had no luxuries, no comfortable chairs or freshly painted walls, but it was full of papers, files, and stubborn hearts. In that place, where cases piled up and stories hurt more than any serial number, Esteban found a possibility. The process Gabriela had proposed was as complex as it was unusual. An application to obtain temporary immigration status under the criterion of exceptional circumstances due to social vulnerability. It was a little known, rarely used, and even less approved legal figure. But it was legal, and that was enough to move forward. For weeks, Gabriela and her team collected all the documentation they could: grade certificates, letters from professors, evidence of volunteer work at the shelter, photos of the spaces where he had slept in subway stations, even a testimony from Tunde, his former roommate, who stated in writing that Esteban had been an exemplary and disciplined student. They also drafted a medical report. The physical toll Esteban had suffered during those months on the street was evident: extreme weight loss, chronic insomnia, nutritional deficiency, severe anxiety. A doctor from the community center signed the report with the phrase, "If he continues to be exposed to current conditions, his health is at risk of irreversible deterioration." Gabriela knew it wasn't enough to convince the judge that Esteban was a good young man. She had to prove that the system had pushed him outside its margins, that his situation was the result of a combination of institutional negligence, humanitarian crisis, and abrupt change in immigration policies. And that, in United States immigration courts, wasn't easy to prove. "We need a letter from you, a personal testimony. In your words," Gabriela told him one morning, while reviewing a mountain of papers. "Don't get poetic. Tell what happened, what you feel, what you hope for." Esteban spent 2 nights writing it. The letter said, "My name is Esteban Gutierrez. I came to this country to study, to help my family, to learn. I didn't come to hide. I didn't come to take anything from anyone. For months I slept in stations, in parks. I bathed in sinks. I went hungry and afraid, but I never lost faith. All I want is an opportunity to go back to studying, to work legally, to live without fear. I'm not asking for handouts. I'm asking for permission to keep dreaming." When Gabriela read the letter, she said nothing for a long while. She just left it on the desk and gave him a shoulder squeeze. "You didn't write this with your hand. You wrote it with your soul." The day they submitted the complete file, Esteban felt like his entire life fit in a cardboard folder. All his mistakes, his achievements, his invisible days. Everything was there, numbered, sealed, waiting for a stranger's judgment. From then on, the waiting began. A wait measured in endless weeks, letters that didn't arrive, calls that weren't answered. Esteban clung to his routine at the shelter, cleaning rooms, organizing clothes, giving basic Spanish classes to Haitian migrants. Every morning, he got up before the others to study English at the library. Every night, he folded his university uniform and stored it like a treasure. Marta watched him with foster mother's eyes. She told him that patience is also a form of resistance. But there were days when Esteban broke down. "What if they deny me?" he asked her one afternoon, while washing dishes in the shelter's kitchen. "Then we fight again. I'm not going to let you fall, Esteban." That promise stayed with him. Meanwhile, some shelter companions began to disappear. Deportations, arrests, forced transfers. Each absence was a reminder of how fragile their situation was, a constant shadow behind their backs. One Tuesday, while cleaning the aisles of a church that lent space to the NGO, he met a Honduran mother who had just arrived with 2 children. She didn't speak English. The children were barefoot. Esteban brought them shoes from a donation box. When the children hugged him without saying a word, he felt something deep. There was a reason he was still there. Weeks later, Gabriela sent him a text message. "We have a hearing date. Get ready." Esteban's heart stopped. Not from fear, from the violent mix of anxiety and hope. He knew that day wouldn't just decide his immigration status, it would decide his future, his identity, his possibility of continuing to live in a country that had broken him, but had also transformed him. During the days before the hearing, Gabriela prepared him with rehearsals, possible questions, negative scenarios. "Don't cry at the hearing," she told him. "Don't try to evoke pity. Be clear, be strong, be yourself." Esteban nodded. But inside, his stomach was in knots. The day came sooner than expected. The shelter lent him a decent shirt. Marta accompanied him to the courthouse door. She wished him luck with a long, warm hug. Esteban took a deep breath before entering. His feet were trembling. His hands were sweating. But as he crossed that door, the only thing he thought was, "I've made it this far. I can't go back." And what happened in that room, nobody saw it coming. The immigration hearing room had nothing solemn about it. There were no waving flags, high ceilings, or imposing tables like in movies. It was a white room with metal chairs and bare walls, lit by fluorescent lights that made everything seem even colder. Esteban sat on the assigned bench with sweaty palms, eyes fixed on the floor, and his case folder on his lap. Gabriela was beside him, impeccable as always, in her grey suit, a pen in hand, and a tense but serene expression. She whispered, "Relax, we're not alone anymore. Do what we've practiced." In front, a serious-faced judge reviewed papers in silence. An interpreter was ready to his right, and in the back of the room, an agent from the Department of Homeland Security observed without expression. Esteban clung to the only thought that could calm his heart. "I don't sleep in stations anymore. I'm not alone anymore. I've fought this far." The hearing began. The judge went over the background. He mentioned the expiration of immigration status, the infraction for unauthorized employment, the failure to renew within the deadline. Each word was like a hard blow. Esteban felt naked in front of everyone. Gabriela took the floor firmly. She explained the conditions under which Esteban had arrived in the country, the sudden changes in immigration policy, the lack of accessible information for international students during the pandemic. She spoke of institutional negligence. She spoke of hunger, of nights in the subway, of medical reports, of volunteer work, of testimonies. The judge listened attentively, took notes, raised his eyebrow from time to time, but said nothing. "This young man," Gabriela said, "is not a violator. He's a victim of the system. He's not asking for compassion. He's asking for opportunity." Then it was Esteban's turn. He stood up with trembling legs. He took a deep breath. The interpreter signaled for him to speak. His voice at first was low but clear. "My name is Esteban Gutierrez. I came to study. I came to learn. I didn't come to hide. I didn't understand the change in laws. No one explained it to me. I had no one to ask. And when I realized I was already outside the system, living on the street, not knowing if I would survive the next day." He paused. The judge observed him, chin resting on one hand. "I'm not seeking pity. I want to be part of this country again. I learned more washing floors and teaching children than in any classroom. I don't want to leave, not because I can't return to my country, but because here I found a purpose. I'm just asking to keep fighting from the inside." Gabriella squeezed his arm. It had been perfect, real, honest. The judge kept silent for several seconds that felt eternal. Then he looked at the immigration agent and asked if the government wished to present additional objections. The agent said no. "I understand, Mr. Gutierrez," the judge finally said. "This isn't the first case I've seen with these characteristics, but it is one of the few where commitment is evident. Your academic record, your community service, your effort to remain useful even in the worst conditions, all of that weighs." Esteban held his breath. He felt his heart was going to burst out of his throat. "I cannot grant you a direct path to residency," the judge continued. "But in virtue of your extraordinary situation and your cooperation, I approve your application to remain in the country under temporary supervision and conditional work authorization. You'll have to renew annually, meet certain conditions, but you'll be able to continue here legally for the time being." There was silence. Gabriella released the air she had been holding. Esteban didn't fully understand the words, but he knew they wouldn't deport him. Not today, not now. "Thank you," he whispered. With eyes full of tears he didn't dare let fall. When they left the room, Marta was already waiting outside the building, like a mother about to learn if her son had passed the exam of his life. Gabriella gave her a thumbs up. Marta ran toward him and hugged him without saying anything. Esteban clung to her like a lost child who finally finds a home. That night at the shelter, there was cake. Someone donated a tray of sweet bread, and Esteban, for the first time in a long time, ate with hunger and joy. The other young people at the shelter congratulated him. Some didn't even fully understand what that temporary permit meant, but they knew it was a victory, one among thousands that never come. But Esteban didn't let himself get carried away by euphoria. In his heart, he knew there was still a long way to go. He wasn't completely free. He wasn't a citizen. He wasn't an enrolled student. But now, at least, he was someone, legal, visible, recognized by a system that had previously ignored him. The days that followed were of order, of reconstruction. Gabriella helped him get a temporary social security number. Marta accompanied him to an interview for an assistant position at an electronics repair shop, where they accepted people with special permits. Esteban was honest in the interview. He told his story. The shop owner, a Puerto Rican of few words, just told him, "I don't care where you're from. If you know how to fix things, welcome." And so, little by little, life began to move again. But Esteban was no longer the same. He slept little. He distrusted good news. He kept every receipt, every document as if they were his life. Because in a way, they were. He kept going to the shelter, not because he had no options, but because he felt he owed something. He kept helping. He kept teaching. He kept dreaming. And every time he saw someone new enter the center with the same look he had months ago, he approached, gave them hot coffee, and told them, "This is not the end. This is where it starts again." Although the hearing was over and the decision was made, Esteban didn't breathe easy immediately. Something inside him refused to believe completely. He feared that a wrong letter, a system error, a new law signed at midnight could undo everything he had achieved. Because that was life for those who walk through the cracks. There's never solid ground, just a thin line between hope and the abyss. During the first weeks with the new status, Esteban barely slept. He compulsively checked his email. Every envelope with official letterhead gave him heart palpitations. Even bank notices made him break out in cold sweat. Gabriella once told him over the phone, "You're not in immediate danger anymore. You have to let your body get used to being safe." But Esteban didn't know what that was like. He didn't remember what it was to feel truly safe. For years, he had learned to survive from constant tension. And now, faced with the real possibility of having a dignified life, his body didn't know how to let its guard down. His job at the electronics shop helped him ground himself. Don Ernesto, the shop owner, was a quiet but fair man. He didn't ask much, but observed everything. Esteban started cleaning tables and organizing cables. Then they let him repair simple devices, radios, blenders, vacuum cleaners, and with time, cell phones and computers. "You have good hands," Don Ernesto told him one Thursday afternoon while watching him solder a motherboard. "But more than that, you have a head, and that's worth more than 100 papers." Esteban appreciated every word. He kept his shop uniform with the same care he had kept his university uniform. It was a symbol of something he had lost and was beginning to recover, identity. Little by little, he began to rebuild himself. He opened a bank account. He got a provisional ID. He learned to use new tools, to read technical manuals in English. He also resumed his studies, this time through free online courses, because he still couldn't formally enroll without completing certain procedures. But he didn't stop. He didn't know how to do it. One afternoon, while organizing his small locker at the shop, he found the letter he had written to the judge before the hearing. He read it again, and for the first time, he didn't cry. He smiled. He realized he was no longer the same young man who had crossed the airport door with $300 and 2 suitcases full of fear. Now, he was something else. Not better, not worse. Different, stronger, more alert, more complete. One night, Marta invited him to dinner at her house. It was the first time she treated him outside the community center environment. Esteban arrived on time, with a supermarket cake in hand and the shirt he wore to the shop. Marta's house was small, but warm. On the walls were photos of her children, all adults. On the dining table, a table full of food, mole, rice, beans, handmade tortillas. She seated him at the table as if he were one more of the family. "When I first saw you, I thought this kid is going to break, but you didn't break. You bent, yes, like everyone does, but you didn't shatter." Esteban looked at her with glassy eyes. "I didn't break because you were there." After dinner, they kept talking. Marta asked him what he planned to do now, if he was going to keep working at the shop, if he was thinking about returning to university. "I want to go back," he said without hesitation. "I don't know how or when, but I'm going to finish my degree. That hasn't changed. Now I just want it more than ever." Marta nodded. Then she got up and went to a small wooden box she had on a shelf. She took out a yellow envelope and handed it to him. "It's a private scholarship, small but real, for young migrants in transition. It doesn't cover everything, but it can help you go back little by little. I already talked to the foundation about you. They're waiting for your application." Esteban felt his heart flip. "Are you serious?" "More than serious. You deserve it." That night, returning to the shelter, Esteban didn't sleep. Not from fear, but from excitement. He spent hours reading the requirements, reviewing documents, putting together a new plan. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew he would have to fight again. But this time it wasn't to survive. This time it was to grow. Weeks later, he received an email. The scholarship had been approved, monthly support for a year. Enough to cover books, materials, and part of the classes at a nearby community college. He wore his university uniform again, although now it was a bit big due to the weight he had lost. He looked at himself in the shelter bathroom mirror before leaving for the first day of classes. He took a deep breath. He combed his hair as best he could and walked to the classroom with firm steps. In the classroom, no one knew his story. To them, He was just another student, but he knew everything. He knew that each line in the notebook, each number on the blackboard was a triumph. He knew he was rebuilding his life with broken pieces, but that even so, he was rebuilding it. And although the path remained uncertain, he was no longer afraid. Because now he knew a truth he had only suspected before. Sometimes dreams don't die. They just hide, waiting for the exact moment to return to the light. Almost 2 years have passed since that hearing. And although he still doesn't have permanent residency or a guaranteed path to citizenship, Esteban Gutierrez no longer lives in the shadows. Today, his life has a name, address, routine, and purpose. He lives in a small studio in the Magnolia Park neighborhood, east of Houston. It's no bigger than the living room of the house where he grew up in Guatemala. But for him, it's a palace. He has a bed, a table where he studies at night, and a stove he learned to use after burning beans 3 times. The windows face a quiet alley. In the mornings, enough light comes in so the plants on his shelf don't die. He works as an assistant in an electronics repair and soldering shop. The salary is fair, not big, but each check has his name legally printed. He saves each dollar carefully, as if each bill were a brick to build his new life. Esteban learned to keep accounts with the same precision with which he adjusts voltages. He writes everything down in a notebook, what he earns, what he spends, what he saves. He has a folder with copies of every document, every official letter, every utility receipt. He lives as if at any moment someone would come to ask for accounts, not from fear, but out of respect for everything it cost to get here. He still goes to the shelter, although he no longer lives there. He gives basic math classes to young migrants who have just arrived. He teaches them not only how to solve equations, but how to fill out forms, how to open a bank account, how to explain their story without shame. Sometimes on weekends, he accompanies Marta to distribute food in vulnerable communities. She insists he's done enough. He insists he's just beginning. "What I do isn't charity," he says. "It's debt." He continues studying, not full-time, but enough to advance. He enrolled in 3 subjects at the community college. He dreams of transferring to a state university in the future. He still keeps his old uniform from the first university. He washed it, ironed it, folded it, and placed it inside a shoebox under the bed. He doesn't wear it, not yet, but he takes it out from time to time. He smells it, he touches it, he looks at it. That uniform no longer represents a failure or a loss. It represents a promise. Sometimes at night, he calls his mother on video call. The connection isn't always good, but they understand each other with looks and smiles. She asks if he's eaten, if he's keeping warm, if he's still studying. He responds yes, always with a calm smile. "When are you coming, son?" "Soon, Mom, but not to stay. To visit you as someone who achieved what you dreamed of." She cries silently on the other side. He does too, but neither says it. One afternoon, while soldering a motherboard with extreme care, Don Ernesto called him to the back of the shop. "You have a visitor," he said with a serious voice. Esteban went to the hallway, wiping his hands with a rag. He wasn't expecting anyone. But there, standing, with a notebook in hand and wide-open eyes, was a thin young man, about 17 years old, with a Central American accent. "Are you Esteban?" he asked. "Yes. And you?" "They told me at the foundation that you could help me, that you went through the same thing, that you know what to do." Esteban looked at him for a moment. He recognized him instantly, not the young man, but the look. That mix of fear, hunger, and hope that he himself had carried. He smiled. "Of course I know what to do. Come on, let's talk." That afternoon, he didn't work anymore. He sat with the young man at the back table of the shop, brought him a soda, paper, and pencil. He asked for his name, where he came from, how long he'd been in the United States, if he had a place to sleep. He wrote everything down. He explained the basics. He gave him Marta and Gabriella's phone numbers. He talked to him about the community center, the forms, the deadlines. But above all, he spoke to him about time, about how everything takes longer than you want, but less than you think. I don't promise it'll be easy, but I won't leave you alone either. That phrase, said without drama, with the certainty of someone who had lived through hell and returned, changed something in the boy's face. Before leaving, the young man asked him, "How did you manage not to give up?" Esteban didn't respond immediately. He looked at his hands marked by work, by the soap from public bathrooms, by the cardboard he had slept on. "I never gave up, because someone told me I wasn't invisible, and because even when dreams hide, if you take care of them, they come back." He watched him leave, with unsure but hopeful steps. Then he returned to his work table. He finished soldering the board with millimetric precision. That night, arriving at his studio, he had rice and eggs for dinner. Then he sat on the bed and wrote a single sentence in his notebook. "My story didn't end here. My purpose began here." And he turned off the light with a smile. And if you like this story, you'll surely love the next one that appears on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications. See you next time.